Hello, my name is Norman Valdez, and I welcome you to another episode of the Brain AI for Social Impact podcast. Today, we're excited to have Jason Shim, a trailblazer in nonprofit digital technology, recognized as a young leader in space. Jason has dedicated his career to leveraging technology for social impact, focusing on using digital tools to enhance nonprofit work and improve communities. In this episode, we discuss Jason's journey into the nonprofit world, his insights on the current AI revolution, and how nonprofits can shape the future of technology. We also explore the role of technology in fostering human connection and the ethical challenges that nonprofits face as they adapt to an incredibly difficult digital world. Tune in for an inspiring conversation with AI, nonprofit innovation, and how we can use technology to create a better world. All right, welcome everybody, and today we're super excited as we usually have all of our guests. We have Jason Shin, a friend, Alex, get started.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for joining us today. And I like to start out with understanding kind of the journey and the why the subjects that we talked to landed in the role that they are. And you've been recognized as a young leader in nonprofit digital technology, but even before that, I would love to hear why nonprofit and social impact, especially as for profit is way more lucrative, being the fact that you are a leader. What made you choose to go into nonprofit space as a technology person?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I would trace my interest in nonprofit back to elementary school. And it was one particular teacher in seventh grade, and she stood in front and exhorted our class to go out and volunteer. And I didn't really have a sense of at the time, like, what to do. And so, opened up a phone book, and I'm already dating myself. It's like, oh yeah, I lived in an era when there actually were phone books. Opened up a phone book and just, started looking up, local organizations. And I ended up calling up a local seniors residence, and just asked about volunteer opportunities. And that was my very first kind of engagement with the nonprofit world, where I volunteered as a receptionist on the weekends at this seniors residence in my community, and just learned a lot about processes, welcoming folks, of course, but also internal processes. It was my first office experience, like having to transfer calls on a phone or typing up documents and such. And as time went on, just volunteering in a lot of different capacities in, like, student clubs and different kinds of student government capacities over the years. And I think what really drew me was that notion of being able to use these kind of collective efforts to build something of value that was helpful to those around me. Where the technology part came in was kind of a separate thread, where I used to work as a program coordinator for an economics camp, and I met a student who was quite into web development and web hosting. And at the time, my skills in that area were fairly rudimentary, and he took me kind of under his wing, even though he was younger than me. And, we kept in touch over the years, and he, got me started on learning about, web servers and things. And I started hosting friends, and that turned into a business where I was running essentially a web hosting company, and hosting and building websites and such. And so after I graduated from university, what kind of were the seeds of the nonprofit career, were the combination of those two things, the interest in technology and also the nonprofit world, and wanting to work in roles that could benefit, the world more broadly. In particular, at the time, I was focused on finding a position that focused on helping youth, because that is something that's quite near and dear to my heart, and, mentoring the next generation, and also providing the tools, the infrastructure, and supporting that as well. So that was my journey into nonprofit. And what keeps me going in the area is just, we have limited time on this world, and when thinking about we want to transmute our time into impact. I just find it quite rewarding, that especially in space where you're building things or working on things that are you know, solving problems and helping people. So there's a great deal of a feeling of satisfaction in doing that work.
That totally resonates with me, and I know and speak for Alex, it probably totally resonates with him. And I would say it's like just because of how much we know each other. I think we sort of calculated it's about 10 years. I would say that you are also kind of been kind of a mentor for me. So thank you publicly that's been the case. But my point of question or reflection is that over, let's say, if you take the span over 10 years, right, as a reference point, we've seen, when it comes to technology, interesting things or interesting milestones that have happened, right? So we got blockchain technology, we had Web 2.0, cloud computing, and all those things. Like when you look at them, they're like, yeah, they're interesting. There are definitely some opportunities here. So let me ask you this. Given that we're living through this transformational technological thing right now called AI, at least from my side, I recognize it to be quite different than anything that I've seen. And as you were saying, looking for opportunities to try to see what is it that we need to know in all sectors, but particularly social impact, philanthropy. What are some of the reflections that you have been having regarding what we're facing right now in terms of opportunity, but also potential, pitfalls that can also happen?
Yeah, when thinking about what the future holds, I think we're living in an age right now where there is massive change and much more potential for even more change. And so, trying to extrapolate, what the future technologies will hold. I think that we can look directionally, like, by posing the question, will we see more or less of a thing? And, if you had to pose a question right now, say, are we going to see more or less of AI? Everything's trending, towards more in that regard. And I think that using that line of general inquiry and reasoning of, what are we going to see more or less of, that we can kind of extrapolate the general directions that things may go in. And so to make that a little bit more focused, in terms of, are people going to generally experience more or less personalization? Generally more personalization. Are we going to see more or less speed when it comes to the internet? Stuff like that. But I think one of the things that I think about a lot is what's not going to change, and I think that brings me to reflections on some of those fundamental human needs of, like, people are going to still want to be feeling or desire that to feel connected and valued, and although those things inherently at first in and of themselves they're not technical, but I think that we're seeing a lot of things right now that are challenging some of those feelings of connectedness. And when we think about what isn't going to change, like, yeah, people do want that, but when we look at some of the technologies and platforms that exist today, that some of them are built to be quite addictive, and I think that that's something that when we're looking at technology, like, are we going to see more or less addictive technology? Well, we certainly have the capacity to build more addictive technology. Whether it's going to go in that direction or not, that will really be determined, by the people. And so, insofar as technology shaping nonprofits, I think that there's a bigger question too. To what degree can nonprofits also shape the technology or the implementation or usage of that technology? And so I think that some of the questions around, like, how can we use the technology to feel more connected? I think that to me is one of the more interesting questions beyond the technological layer itself of, like, okay, the technology can do like XYZ, but the next layer of that is, how can we use the technology to make people feel more connected, more valued, more whichever. I think an example that comes to mind is, Facebook birthdays. It's a constant evolution of, that it's an extension of, wishing someone a happy birthday on Facebook is that, folks are, there's a standard, the default, happy birthday with 3 emojis that, Facebook will present to you. There is, a personalized message that people can write as well. And, one thing that I've observed is, things that people may send a private message to make it a little bit more personalized, or, go out of the way to send you a personalized, video message. And all these ways of engagement are kind of permutations of how people are using technology to connect. And I think some of the bigger questions of, just as a thought experiment, how might we use AI to wish someone, happy birthday in a really meaningful human way that elevates the experience and makes people feel more connected? Would there be a future in which, we can instruct an AI to, go through every single photo that we've ever taken together, remix them together, make, a highlights reel, and, package it all up. That we already have some of those capabilities already, but, how do we move it beyond the realm of like, oh, it can come across as, mass produced, and, how do we elevate those fundamentally human type experiences? Yeah. So in terms of, where my head's at in terms of like where technology has gone and where it's going, I think that the ever-present question of, how can we use it to elevate the human experience is top of mind for me.
And just drawing when you mentioned Facebook, and we have a history of not necessarily having society deal well with social media. Our relationship with social media is one filled with tension at best. Looking at things like Cambridge Analytica, and where Facebook was used with the intention to sway votes in the US, and looking at the future of the deception economy with the intention to deceive. I read in an article that you referenced the light side and the dark side of Star Wars as really looking at AI. So I have two questions in that regard. How do you see the emerging deception economy fitting into this framework, and how we can really look at it? And given the fact that Nick Rosa, in a previous episode, we talked about embracing the geekness of us and appreciating it, what would be your assuming that in this scenario you are on the light side and being a Jedi, what is the color of your lightsaber?
Yeah, well, I like to think that, it's, blue or green, or, whichever the light side lightsabers are. I think when, your reference to the deception economy, I think digging deeper into that is when we think about, platforms and the incentive models, I think there's a lot to be said for the incentives, for, the organizations that are controlling the platforms or managing them, because, incentives are a huge part of it. And when we think about, what is acting in the public interest, and so when we think about, what are the institutions that are entrusted with acting in the public interest, off the top of my head, it's, nonprofits and generally government. And however, do we have, nonprofit, social media platforms, or, government social media platforms? And I'm not saying that's a direction we need to go in necessarily, but, just as again, as a thought experiment, and, the challenges inherent in, trying to mount, a challenger to, a multi-billion-dollar, company, with established, network effects and all that. So, the role that regulation plays in it as well. I think that's where, left unchecked, things like, the deception economy will unfold. That, if you are a user and you're not paying for it, you're going to be paying for it in other ways. You're paying for it with your attention, and, that the advertising model, unless another type of, value model emerges to keep the engines running, like that is where the incentives lie. And so, I think that's the role that, broader regulation, can and frankly should play in terms of, buffering, against, some of these um, directions that the incentives may provide folks. I think, broadly speaking, for things like, privacy, breaches, that there are things like, until there are, clear disincentives for organizations to respond to that. When we think about, when taken more seriously in that regard, for all of us right now in this recording are, have gotten those emails from organizations indicating, the typical, boilerplate of like, we're sorry to notify you that, there's been a breach of our systems, and here is, your standard, 1 year subscription to, privacy monitoring, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but bigger picture, should that data have been collected to begin with? Was it truly needed? And, when you do it, if you're able to file a disclosure request, I filed a few, and I'm surprised at, how much data they actually stored. It's like, you didn't really need this data, did you? Or, you have transactions that are from like years ago that, are being ingested to, better markets. So, I think it's really that going back to those broader ethical questions of, just because you can do it, should you be doing it? And I think a shorthand for a thought experiment that I lean on is, that quotation, Arthur C. Clarke, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think that's a useful launch point to understand, we live in a magical age right now where we could do things that, even 10 years ago, if you told someone, it's like, oh, we could do this now, it's like, oh my gosh, that is magical. You have an AI that can like write an entire, thing, or you can generate, images from a single sentence. But when we think about all the legends that, or the mythology around wielding unlimited power, like it's the themes are, fairly consistent throughout. It's like, using good judgment, not giving into the dark side, you can do the thing, but you don't do the thing. You don't use the force squeeze, you do a gentler kind of approach. And I think that, that can be a good reference point for folks where, hey, maybe folks should, rewatch some of these classic sci-fi movies, or reread their kind of magical fantasy things to kind of understand some of the dynamics that inherently present when giving folks new forms of power and capabilities.
Yeah, and just to Alex, how do you know that that Jason just would know like the Star Wars reference? I would like to know, but you hit it, and I think the question for me is like, I like the purple lightsaber from Master Windu from the original the prequels. That was like, if you ask me what color, that will be my favorite. Because like purple, you can have a purple lightsaber. That's great. I want to have a purple lightsaber. But anyways, so you and I share a lot of things in common, and one of those things is the education space. So you taught at George Brown College. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I just happened to run into you at a conference or two, talking about great tools. A lot of the tools that you've shown, I actually had ended up using actually because of you. But just as an educator, and because I've been teaching some AI, particularly one course. One thing is a challenge that I have seen is that what we're living today is so fast paced, and things that you can teach, and then in just a couple of weeks after, you have to rework all of it again, and you're not working with all the same things. The ground is constantly shifting. I wonder if you had, by any chance, had any reflections as an educator. Just what does that landscape of constant shifting does, whether it be as an educator or whether it be like education institutions, to try to see what is the best or the most conceivable way in which education can actually be transferred to people in order to actually be able to make use of the power and the opportunity that AI represents for anybody, not just young people or youth, but just anybody, especially when we're talking about context in the nonprofit world where we still have people who are like using spreadsheets instead of using a database, for example, right? CRM versus a spreadsheet and things like that. Any reflections about like just, the challenge that it becomes to educate in the fast shifting and the very uneven space that we're living today?
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the challenges I recall having was when teaching analytics to students was that every time there's a major feature shift or the algorithm changes or something that you know it would wipe clean everything they had learned or entire like sections. And I'd be quite straightforward with folks and be like, I'm going to teach you this thing, but if something shifts, that's going to be the great leveler that you know I'm going to have to very quickly learn the thing, relearn it, and then reteach it. But the best thing that I advise the students in my class were to really hone in on their how they learn how to learn and how to do it quickly and cycle through that, because especially when it comes to from platform technology, the platform technical stuff, that changes at a very quick rate. And I think it's important to identify the higher order strategies and principles that underpin it. So when thinking about AI currently, I mean, even in the past 2 years, when we think about how we interacted with AI versus now, like their entire of prompts that have emerged, and the thing is, all that can be wiped away by an advanced model that could come out a year from now. And so I think when thinking about in the nonprofit context and learning and education, it's really for organizations and for individuals to understand how do you learn best, how do you learn how to learn, how do you acquire those new skills, and how do you do it quickly and repeatedly, but also ensuring that specifically with AI, I think that one of the opportunities there is that you can have a good enough kind of co-pilot by your side to learn and explain things, bearing in mind, yes, the hallucinations that may naturally emerge, but I think the principle of good enough is that you can ask, explain like in five, the following thing, like that hasn't really existed before. Prior to that, if you wanted that kind of feedback, like you'd be potentially posting a question on Reddit, or or out there trying to find information. And so, I think that's the big opportunity there. Where I think that we are still figuring out is, what are we going to do about the experience of early career professionals that would typically get experience of doing, the early drafts of, say, writing a grant or whichever, that, we could be looking at a future in which, the tasks that typically would have gone to an earlier career professional are now being subsumed by an AI. That how are people going to gain experience in doing those things? And I think ensuring that we're developing those models of training to ensure that people are getting the experience, so that they can have the capabilities to revise those drafts that they typically would have written in a previous generation. That I think that's still playing out right now.
And you said a couple of things there that I want to touch upon that I find really, really important. First of all, it is one I find really interesting for my own personal use. You mentioned explain it to me like I'm five. There's Wired had a video series called using 5 levels of difficulty to explain a concept. I find that I use that to learn concepts and have AI actually use that format, so they gradually talks to me through a concept. And on the flip side, when I'm explaining a concept, whether or not it be theoretical or a project, I use it on the inverse to how to tell people, because it's often it's a very useful tool to use in various ways. And my question relates to, again, just furthering on education, opportunities to leverage AI to personalize education, and really opportunities where right now in many fields AI is having a disruptive nature. But is how can we see the opportunity in education as AI having a positive disruption? Because you mentioned learning how to learn, and really how we're seeing now is this is an opportunity to move from current educational systems seeing what to learn to how to learn, and the need that we have to change our educational system to reflect that. How that is an opportunity to reflect on what our nature with technology to this point, because we're not educated for critical thinking, creativity, curiosity. So we're not very well adept as youth or adults for social media, for instance. We're not really thinking through, is this truth or not? As an educator, how do you see that opportunity? And two, how, given the fact that the educational space overall is very torn about how to address it, how are you as an educator who knows technology trying to influence a positive change in that manner?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is definitely trying to model that behavior, and one of the challenges in trying to model the behavior is that you're trying to model something in using technology that is also emerging at the same time. So it's simultaneously you have to be really trying to stay on top of things where new technology is coming out. How do you ingest it, understand it, and then figure out ways to model and teach it. The other thing that I want to kind of dig into a little bit is that I think that learning is inherently relational. That at the beginning of this, I mentioned that that my path to nonprofits was based on the seventh grade teacher who go out and volunteer and get involved in your community. Is that when we think about learning, a big part of it is that yes, there's the facts learning and the experience learning part, but a lot of it needs to be stewarded, and the transfer of that knowledge, or curiosity and desire to learn among students or others. And I think the shift that I can see things going towards would be how do you, if we think about it in terms of the technology itself is going to inspire us and make us more curious, I think that is a non-starter. I don't think that technology has the capability to do that in and of itself. It's how do people insert themselves into that equation of leveraging the technology to inspire the curiosity, to inspire the ongoing learning, and to get those patterns going. I think that the opportunities around individualized learning. I think that the next generation of potential learning analytics or learning models that would be really interesting to explore would be around let's say if you can model that you'd like someone to understand a certain concept, and that along the way, if you can map out all the potential different variables that help get you there, so if it may be better conveyed in a certain language or in a certain if you're using like a game like I don't know Fortnite to teach angles or things like that, and I think that's where there may be some really interesting possibilities in using data and analytics to provide super personalized experiences that are also used in tandem with an educator to transfer that knowledge. And I think over time that if we can build platforms with the, if you put a metric, be like, we want people to spend as much time as possible on this platform to, get, advertising eyeballs on, then, the posing the question of, how can we get, people to, spend more time to be reaching, a certain learning objective. I think that is one of those, if we set a goal of doing that kind of thing, that that could have some really interesting results in the future.
I really like you say, you keep saying things that are just, like, yes, you're on the money. And one of the things you said like that, it was like, when talking about AI and the nonprofit world, is like, the idea of like, how can nonprofit actually shape the technology, right? And that kind of resonates with me in the way, like, I always think of this quote that John F. Kennedy said, like, you probably know this quote, ask not what you can do for the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. So it's just like this spirit that something has to come from within you to go a little bit beyond the barriers that you're given, and to do more than maybe most people would actually be able to do, right? And then nonprofit has many barriers, as you very well know, like, lack of resources and like overwork and like one person doing the job of 5 or 3 or whatever, many hats. You speak a little bit about some thoughts that you may have about how nonprofit can shape AI, the technology, what are the contributions, and also given again the barriers that we have to face, because you see, like, from my perspective, people that understand technology, which is I think from a specific lens of philanthropy, nonprofit, as in all the three of us here, understand certain things that other people don't understand, and then would want to have some go beyond what is already given to you. And I can tell, like, sacrifice a lot of the maybe personal time that you need to have, some weekends and whatever. Like, just speak a little bit about, like, what does it take to actually get to the point where you can actually have a meaningful contribution to shape something as big as AI from the nonprofit lens.
I think that it's because it's a huge topic now, and I mean, there's so many layers to it. I mean, there's the technical layer, and then there's the ethics layer, the implementation layer, the governance layer, all those things. And so I can speak more to, personally, I think, part of it is, it depends, where your interest may be as well. That, if there's very little interest in the technical layer itself, it's going to be really hard to, motivate yourself to read, the technical deep dives into, some of the AI stuff as well. But information of, if it's of interest, doing a deep dive into some of the technical papers that, using AI, it can be quite accessible as well to interpret some of the emerging research in there. But I find interesting is that for some of the emerging research that's being published in journals and such, is that's almost like glimpsing into the future. Because, a lot of the AI stuff that, we're experiencing now, I mean, the technical papers for those were published years ago in terms of, what was possible, or what was kind of happening in the lab. And, part of it was like, okay, this is the proof of concept, and now we need to refine it so that it's production ready, it can be scaled, and all that kind of stuff. So if folks are looking for insight around, what the future holds, it's diving deep into some of those journal articles on emerging kind of AI research projects for some of the early findings, and that can give a glimpse into what might be introduced as a future feature set in some of the products and directions. Is just putting in the time. I think sometimes there's not really any shortcut to having to sit down and do the reading or do the learning, or having to do the slow reading it, rereading it until it makes sense, and trying to make sense of it, and then trying to apply it to the context in which we're operating in. And the next layer to that of, understand the technical part, applying it to the context in which you're operating in, is also providing, yourself with a little space to dream of the possibilities. And I think that's where if it, one path that we could go down is, we keep on, just using the products that are provided to us, and that is all we really have to work with. The other that is a distinct possibility is that, if we're living in an age of AI, dreaming up things and being able to create, basic prototypes of things that we would like to see, that in some ways, a couple of years from now, or even now, like you can build those, things that you would have needed to hire a developer to do, fairly recently. So, your invocation of, John F. Kennedy earlier, I think, I'll reference, his, we choose to go to the moon speech, where, we choose to go to the moon, and paraphrasing, not because it is easy, but because it's hard. And so, when thinking about what's the hard things right now to, think about or to conceptualize, that we could use technologies like AI to, advance. And, that may be a measure of, some potential areas of opportunity where it's, what are the easy things? Those, can be done fairly, quickly, but, what are the hard things that AI can't do just yet? But, it forces us to kind of think a little further along the time horizon, on a 5, 10, 20-year time horizon. What are the things we need to establish today in order to get to that figurative space program, or AI dream that things are working to the benefit of humanity or communities.
I really love that reflection about dreaming, and I see it correlated with, we talk quite a bit of that we're in an imaginary crisis, that it's difficult to see a beneficial future, and how do we actually do that collectively. I love the conversation around dreaming up the possibility, but collective dreaming, and when we're looking at collective intelligence, or hybrid intelligence even, how do we collectively start dreaming for beneficial future? I want to talk about how do we effectuate that, because we have sector, social impact, nonprofits, philanthropy, that doesn't always have the capacity to dream, to spend time on it. It's often people who are inside of their desk. We have underutilized data by and large in the sector. We often have leadership and decision makers that are far removed from understanding of data, as well as on AI. How do we start moving towards a reality where we can spend time having that conversation? Because like you said, and I'll draw the analogy, there's a great video interview with the chief engineer for Khan Academy. When they were developing Khanmigo together with OpenAI, ChatGPT was not good at teaching math to kids, but they sat on a ton of training data. They fed it to ChatGPT, and suddenly ChatGPT was great at teaching math to kids for their purpose. How do we do the same for nonprofit, social impact, and philanthropy? Because we have the data. We often have a disconnect in the understanding of AI nonprofits, but we need to dream together about what is possible. To your point, here's what the tools are today that OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic have made available, but they're not thinking in regards to social impact. How can we think about the next 5 years, 10 years more effectively?
Yeah, I think that it's important to I distinguish what are technological problems and what are kind of overall broader, sector organizational challenges that people may be encountering. And so when thinking about, what you mentioned earlier in terms of, disconnects or, understanding of, what's happening or things like, that's not an inherently technological problem necessarily. It's, it could be more of a governance problem and or management type thing. So I think that it's some of the addressing some of those needs within organizations for the ever-present, trying to build capacity in terms of, the governance and, effective, leadership and management and things. I think having a really clear beacon of the thing that folks are trying to do. So both at a high, kind of sector level, what broadly, what is the sector that we wish to see? That one that is thriving, that is everyone is fulfilling their missions, and also using technology really effectively, to fulfill those missions collectively as well, to benefit humanity. Understand AI as a tool, or technology as a tool that. To the degree that organizations can be really clear on their missions, that as the tools evolve, and going back to what we chatted about earlier about consistent learning and being able to learn quickly, that as the times change, being able to adapt those technologies to the mission. Bigger questions that also need to be directly addressed, though, as well, where, I don't want to shy away from the fact that, technological capacity within the nonprofit sector, that is a challenge. That, there's some research that, Cinder recently had been a part of that, identified that, compared to other industries, the proportion of tech workers within nonprofits relative to other industries is lower. It's 1% compared to 5% in other industries, at least in this research. And so, I think things like that need to be addressed. That if our future is predicated on digital and technology, then how do we ensure that the capacities to build that digital and technology is taken care of? I think looking at organizational structures themselves is something that I think will be evolving and continues to evolve. That it is still very. I'm not saying that nonprofits need to have software developers on staff. I'm not saying that at all. However, it's to the staffing structures within nonprofits. How many nonprofits do have software developers? Depending on what some of the digital ambitions are. That if you're striving to be a really advanced organization in the future, is that on the roadmap to have someone who can either develop the things that you wish to see, develop the infrastructure, maintain it, all those kinds of things, because until there can be a different of the role that technology plays, I think the way that it's resourced as well, how do we move beyond just provisioning hardware to the bigger picture, where even for organizations it's still relatively uncommon to have like a designated chief technology officer, that you certainly see it in the larger organizations, but so having ensuring dedicated roles in technology within nonprofits to help build some of those capabilities. So I think that is one of the things that will be important for organizations to consider moving forward. That yes, in addition to their tech strategy, their people resourcing around it as well.
And you literally took the thing that I was going to mention, because I have it open here, and I was going to say that the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Resilience, Digital Resilience, has created a report in July, so it's just like 2 months ago. Report's called Canada's Nonprofit Tech Workforce, and the exact thing that you just said, the 1%, I was going to ask you about that. Do you have any reflections about that? But yeah, it is true that for nonprofits, as we said, understaffed, and the technical person can sometimes be somebody who is just expected to be the technical person. It could just be like the social media manager or coordinator, right? Oh, it's technology, right? So they must know technology, so they must know AI. And so to me, the challenge is like, how do we get, I don't know if it's empowering. To me, it's like a matter of like highlights the necessity to actually have those 1%, which is technological workforce in the sector, and actually it calls for a higher collaboration, a higher unity, because we need to connect all those people. We need to connect these people, and we need to, from my perspective, we need to find a way in which we can help and guide the understanding that is very limited within the sector to the leadership. because that social media manager may not be in the position to infect your strategy, right? For example, but the one that is actually at the top lacks the understanding. And so, anyways, there's so many things we can go and say about that. And it's not necessarily asking you anything, but it's just more sort of like just reflecting on it. But we're closing on the podcast, and I think just Alex has a reflection, and then I will just ask you one thing, and then we're closing.
Yeah, no, and I think it was along the lines what you were thinking, Norman. It's given the fact that we, like you said, Jason, like the nonprofits philanthropy doesn't necessarily have somebody on staff. How can we as a sector connect organizations or thematic fields with expertise from AI expertise in research and so forth, so that we can explore thematic, what can AI do for X, so that we can do it as a collective and learn together rather than needing somebody on staff, for instance, as well. And that's obviously a role for the ecosystem, and how do we do that effectively? So
yeah,
yes.
I think certainly if I could, make a like for the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience too, it's that that's for some of the work around there is to stay connected to the organizations like Cinder, and I think broadly too for the work to advance the digital state within organizations. There's some really great work that's that N10 has done as well, and I'll call out in particular their Tech Accelerate tool. That it's a assessment that organizations can take that will help identify their digital maturity, and so and identify specific things that can be done to advance digital maturity within organizations. And I think some of those broader infrastructure sectoral pieces have emerged and will continue to develop in terms of helping to push things along to get to that dreamed future.
I want to thank you, Jason, for joining us to the podcast. We reached the end. As I think happens to a lot of our guests, we could go on and on and on, but we have to end it here. So just quick thing, is there anything you would like to share, anything that we haven't asked you, anything that we haven't reflected on, anything you want to share with the audience in terms of thoughts in general, anything you want to put plugs to Cinders, anything, whatever it is, just share anything you would like to share, if there's anything.
Yeah, if folks are interested, they can certainly learn more about Cinder at ccndr.ca. And they can sign up for the mailing list there as well. And if I have to, leave off with a thought, it would be that when it comes to the future in technology, I think it's really important to maintain a sense of optimism, that there are many paths and many possibilities that stand before us now, with all the new capabilities that are coming out. And we said for optimism, that, not in a unthinking kind of way, but the optimism that we can use technology for good, because I think that will help channel some of the thinking too around, if there's certainly many ways that things can go wrong, but in terms of to the points that we were speaking to earlier of how do we get to that future, we have to paint that picture for ourselves and do so confidently that it's like, hey, we need to be painting and believing in this optimistic future for ourselves, because otherwise, how are you going to motivate yourself to build it? It's like, I think there's a lot of really, great things on the horizon, and that if we maintain a sense of optimism around, the faith that, we can collectively, build for the greater good together, that we can get there.
Thank you so much, Jason. And yes, and I'd like to have you back also in a future episode. But yeah, I want to thank everyone, the listeners, for following. And yes, please follow us, share, and yes, stay tuned for more interesting guests. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having me.